The arrow I refused to take. The bow string snapped, and I didn't even get to taste the peach blossom wine. The cup was barely at my lips when I heard it, that familiar, terrible whistle cutting through the air from the west side of the garden. I looked up. A black feathered arrow was slicing through the layers of flowering branches, and it was heading straight for Yao Chengdu, the man sitting beside me. He was dressed in a robe the color of pale moonlight. One hand was still resting on the jade wine flask he'd just used to refill my cup. The arrow was closing in. He didn't move. He didn't even frown. His eyes, those gentle eyes that I had once trusted more than my own heartbeat, they stayed fixed on me. In that same split second, I saw the reflection in the polished silver wine pot. The palace maid standing behind me. She was raising her hand, far too close, her palm aimed directly at my back. In my past life, I never saw that hand. All I knew back then was that Xiao Chongyu was my betrothed. He was the one who brought me hot tea when I was 15, shivering on my knees outside the ancestral hall. He was the one who stood with me beyond the palace gates until dawn on the anniversary of my mother's death. So when that arrow came, I didn't hesitate. I threw myself in front of him. I caught it with my own body. The arrow had pierced my left shoulder, and the poison poured through my blood, straight into my lungs and organs. I was 19 that year. For the next 3 years, I never left the most secluded courtyard in the second prince's residence. My father searched desperately for medicine, handing over most of the properties my mother had left me just to support Xiao Chongyu. My elder brother investigated the poison and was falsely accused of embezzling disaster relief silver. He died in prison. My father's hair turned white overnight, and later, he died of illness on the road to exile while I lay on a bed that reeked of bitter medicine. Then Shinruin came in, wearing a newly made red dress, carrying a bowl of tonic. She leaned close to my ear and smiled, triumphant. "Sister," she whispered, "the arrow at the spring banquet was arranged by His Highness." The archer was aiming for his left shoulder. He was wearing soft armor beneath his robe. Even if you hadn't thrown yourself in front of him, the palace maid behind you would have pushed you. The antidote was already prepared. Once you were injured, the Shin family would willingly place its money, grain, and connections in his hands. Xiao Chongyu came to see me that night. I clutched his sleeve and asked if it was true. He was silent for a long time. Then he peeled my fingers away from his sleeve, one by one. "Zaiwi," he said, "the arrow was only meant to injure your shoulder." The imperial physician was nearby. We had the antidote ready. The archer merely misjudged the angle. "You have already done so much for me. What harm is there in helping me accomplish my great cause one final time before dawn?" A second bowl of medicine, delivered by Shinruin, burned through my stomach and intestines. When I died, peach blossoms were blooming beyond the window. And now, here I was again. The shadows of those blossoms were the same. The wine smelled the same. The arrow was flying along the same path. But this time, I didn't move to shield him. The palace maid's hand was about to touch my back when I struck my wine cup against the edge of the table and let my body collapse to the right. Her palm swept through empty air. She stumbled forward and crashed into the table, lurching it sideways. Xiao Chongyu instinctively reached out to catch me, shifting half his body away from its original position. The next instant, the arrow plunged into flesh, not the left shoulder they had carefully planned for. It struck the place where his shoulder met his chest, barely an inch from his heart. His breath stopped. Warm blood splashed across my cheek for one suspended heartbeat. The entire imperial garden fell silent. Then the screams erupted like a breaking wave. "An assassin. The second prince has been shot. Protect His Majesty." Tables overturned. Cups and porcelain shattered across the ground. Noble women and young ladies fled in every direction. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to keep falling. The pain I expected never came, but an arm caught me firmly around the waist. The faint scent of sandalwood overwhelmed the smell of blood as I fell against an unfamiliar, solid chest. The man holding me didn't speak at once. Chaos surged around us, but he stood perfectly steady. Without thinking, I tightened my hand around his sleeve. A low voice sounded above me. "Miss Shin." I remained motionless. The voice came closer. People who have truly fainted rarely grip a man's sleeve with such force. My eyelashes trembled. He noticed, yet he didn't expose me. Instead, he removed his cloak, still warm, from his body and draped it over me, concealing the part of my dress soaked with wine. "Your Grace, are you injured?" someone asked anxiously. Only then did I realize who had caught me.
Xia Linwan.
The only son of Grand Princess Xiaowa and the notoriously unapproachable Duke of Anghua in my previous life. After the Xin family fell into ruin, he had been the one who petitioned the emperor to reopen my brother's case. But by then, Xiao Chenggu had already seized too much power. Xia Linwan hadn't been able to save any of us. "She was not struck by the arrow," Xia Linwan said. "She appears to have fainted from fright." He spoke the words "from fright" with remarkable calm. He didn't hand me over to one of the panicking palace maids. Instead, he carried me himself to a side hall, far away from Xiao Chenggu. As we passed through the covered corridor, I heard an imperial physician shouting, "Bring the antidote from the blue porcelain bottle. Quickly, the poison activates the moment it touches blood." The arrow had only just struck Xiao Chenggu. The physician hadn't examined the wound yet. He already knew what poison it carried. He even knew exactly where the antidote had been placed. My hand tightened beneath Xia Linwan's cloak. The flaws had always been this obvious. In my previous life, I had simply loved Xiao Chengyu so much that I found an explanation for every impossible detail. Xia Linwan placed me on a cushioned couch once we were alone. A clean handkerchief brushed gently against my cheek, wiping away Xiao Yu's blood. "How long does Miss Shan intend to remain asleep?" I knew there was no point in continuing the performance. I opened my eyes. Xia Linwan stood before the couch. His black sleeve was deeply wrinkled where I had clutched it. "Why did your Grace not expose me? What benefit would I gain from doing so?" His gaze dropped to my hand, which was still gripping his sleeve. I released him at once. "Forgive me." "It is nothing," he said, smoothing the fabric. "Your lack of manners interests me less than something else." I looked up. "Before the arrow was fired, you glanced toward the western flower wall. Then you avoided the palace maid's hand." His voice remained mild. "Were you avoiding the arrow, Miss Shan, or were you avoiding the person behind you?" Outside the window, the spring wind stirred the peach trees. Petals scattered across the courtyard. I held his gaze. I was terrified. Xia Linwan didn't smile. "Were you?" "Yes." He nodded as though he had accepted the answer. At the door, he stopped. "The next time you pretend to faint, remember to loosen your grip first." I watched his back disappear beyond the doorway. The heart that had been pounding wildly since the moment of my rebirth finally began to settle. I didn't know how badly Xiao Chengyu was injured. I didn't care. In my previous life, he had arranged the arrow. I had paid the price. In this life, whoever placed another person's life on the gambling table would sit at that table himself. I would not shield him from this arrow. Not again. Several palace maids entered soon after Xia Linwan left and helped me change my clothes. I lay down again, my face genuinely pale. Rebirth hadn't erased the memory of dying. The whistle of the arrow. The warmth of blood pouring from my shoulder. The sensation of poison tearing through my organs. Each remained as vivid as if it had happened only moments ago. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. But I wasn't trembling because I regretted failing to save Xiao Chengyu. I was trembling because for the first time, I had survived. Half an hour later, hurried footsteps sounded outside the hall. Noble consort Jia entered without waiting to be announced. She was always impeccably dressed. Now her elaborate hair was slightly disordered, and her eyes were red. Yet she still carried herself with the authority of an imperial consort. Shinruin followed closely behind her. The instant she saw me, tears spilled from her eyes. "Sister, you are finally awake." She rushed to the couch and seized my hand. She had behaved exactly the same way in my previous life. She had wept and claimed she had been terrified. She had told me that Xiao Chengyu had remained beside my bed for an entire night. She had said everyone in the palace praised my devotion. At the time, I had believed she was truly worried about me. Now I noticed how painfully hard She was gripping me. Her fingernails nearly broke my skin. "How is the second prince?" I asked hoarsely, and noble consort Jaw stared at me. The arrow passed through the place between his shoulder and chest. Fortunately, it missed his heart. The imperial physicians are still treating him. Her gaze swept across my face. "I am told that you were sitting beside him when the arrow came." "Yes." "Then why did you suddenly fall?" The room became silent. Every servant was watching me. I let confusion fill my expression. I heard a loud sound. My vision went black. After that, I remember nothing. Noble consort Jaw pressed her lips together. "You did not see the arrow?" "No." "You did not see you were in danger?" "No." She examined my face for a long time, searching for a crack. Shin Wan was the first to lose patience. But Sister was the closest person to His Highness. If Sister had not fallen, perhaps the arrow would not have injured him. Her voice shook with grief, as if I had committed an unforgivable crime. I looked at her. "Are you saying I should have taken the arrow for him?" Shin Wan froze. "That is not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" I didn't raise my voice, but everyone in the hall could hear me. When the arrow flew toward the second prince, he was surrounded by guards, eunuchs, and imperial soldiers. None of those men acted in time, yet you condemn an unarmed woman for failing to place her own body in front of him. Does my life mean so little to you? Do you believe it is naturally worth less than the second prince? Several palace maids lowered their heads. Shinruin's face turned white. "Sister, I was only worried about His Highness." I spoke without thinking. "If you were so worried, why did you not throw yourself in front of him?" Her lips trembled. No answer came. Noble consort Jaw struck the table. "Enough." Her gaze became colder. Wan merely spoke out of concern. Why must sisters quarrel over such a small matter? My life was a small matter to her. It had been the same in my previous life. After I was shot, I burned with fever for 3 days. Noble consort Jaw visited and held my hand, praising me for behaving as the second prince's future wife should. When the poison left me unable to bear children, she gently advised me to choose a concubine for Xiao Chang'e herself, because producing an imperial heir was more important than my feelings. She had never regarded me as a person. I was merely a bridge between the Shin family and Xiao Chang'e. If the bridge cracked, it could be repaired. If it could not be repaired, they would replace it. Your Highness is right. I lowered my eyes. I spoke improperly. Noble consort Jaw's expression eased. She approached the couch, her voice becoming gentle again. You were frightened. I will not blame you. When he awakens and learns you are unharmed, he will be relieved. Your wedding is approaching. You will soon be husband and wife. A married couple must support one another. She emphasized the words support one another. I looked up. Your Highness is right. Satisfaction flashed through her eyes. She believed I had surrendered. I continued. That is why I wish to apologize to the second prince personally after he awakens. In a moment of danger, I thought only of myself and fainted. I am clearly unworthy of becoming his principal consort. The satisfaction vanished from her face. What nonsense are you speaking? I would not dare speak nonsense. I threw aside the blanket and made as if to kneel. Your Highness, please permit me to break off the engagement. Silence. Noble consort Jaw's voice rose sharply. Shin Wan stared at me in shock. She had probably assumed I would sulk for a few days at most. She had never imagined I might truly surrender the position of imperial daughter-in-law. In my previous life, I had endured too much for this marriage. I had endured until everyone forgot I could simply refuse it. Noble consort Jaw took a slow breath. You are badly frightened today and are not in your right mind. I will pretend I did not hear the words break off the engagement. You will rest now. Tomorrow you will enter the palace and attend to him at his bedside. I am afraid I cannot. Why, I lifted my still trembling hand. Whenever I hear the sound of a bowstring, my heart begins racing. The physician said I suffered a severe shock and must rest quietly. If I force myself to enter the palace, I may disturb the second prince's recovery. Noble consort Jaw clenched her teeth. I knew she didn't truly need me to nurse Xiao Chang'e. She needed me to be seen beside his bed. She needed everyone to witness that I remained deeply devoted to him. Only then could the bitter ruse at the spring banquet be considered a success. If sister cannot go, I can care for His Highness in her place, Shinran suddenly said, her cheeks reddening as though she had summoned great courage. I am deeply concerned for sister as well. If I can lighten her burden, I am willing to do anything. Noble consort Jia frowned but didn't immediately agree. I gently returned Shin Ruan's grip. How thoughtful of you. In that case, I shall trouble you to go in my place. Delight flared in her eyes, though she continued to protest. My status is humble. It may be improper. You are a daughter of the Marquis estate and my own younger sister. What could be improper about it? I turned to noble consort Jia. Ruan is attentive and skilled at caring for others. No one could be more suitable to enter the palace in my place. Noble consort Jia was displeased, but she could find no acceptable reason to refuse. If she objected, it would reveal that she didn't merely want someone to tend Xiao Chenggu. She specifically wanted me. At last, she nodded coldly. Very well. Wan may enter the palace tomorrow. Shin Wan lowered her head to conceal her smile and bowed obediently. After noble consort Jia departed, Shin Wan remained beside my couch, pretending to be worried. Sister, do you truly mean to end the engagement? Do you hope I will? She shook her head quickly. Of course not. You and the second prince grew up together. Your love is known throughout the capital. Today was only an accident. How can one accident erase so many years of affection? I watched her. In that case, when you enter the palace tomorrow, persuade His Highness on my behalf. Her eyes brightened. Do not worry, sister. I nodded. Servants moved beyond the windows, whispering about Xiao Yu's injury. Shin Wan sat for a while longer, then hurried home to prepare the clothes she intended to wear to the palace. After she left, I slowly opened my hand. 4 deep red crescent marks remained in my palm. Xia Linwan stood outside the half-open window. I didn't know when he had arrived. He didn't enter. He merely looked at me through the window. When did your grace come? When you asked your sister why she had not taken the arrow for the second prince. I felt strangely self-conscious. Does your grace also believe I am heartless? Xia Linwan leaned against a corridor pillar. The spring wind stirred the hem of his robe. There were at least 100 people at the banquet today. If every person who failed to take the arrow for the second prince must be punished, the entire imperial garden would not have enough space for them to kneel. Something in my chest loosened. All day, everyone had asked why I hadn't saved Xiao Chenggu. Only Xia Linwan had told me that failing to save him was not a crime. I developed a fever the night I returned home. In my dreams, I was once again trapped in the sunless courtyard from my previous life. Someone was hanging red lanterns outside. Shin Wan passed the gate in wedding robes. I called through the paper window and asked where she was going. She laughed. Sister cannot bear children, so naturally His Highness must marry me. Do not worry. Once I become his secondary consort, I will serve him well in your place. I struggled to rise from the bed. The moment my feet touched the ground, agony tore through my chest as though the arrow wound had split open again. Then a warm hand rested against my forehead. Zaiwi. My father's voice pulled me out of the nightmare. I opened my eyes. He sat beside the bed. In a single day, several new strands of white seemed to have appeared at his temples. My elder brother, Shinming Jiao, stood behind him, his expression dark enough to frighten anyone. What happened in the palace? My father asked. Noble consort Jia sent word that the shock had confused your mind and that you had even demanded an end to the engagement. I pushed myself upright. My mind is perfectly clear. I truly wish to end the engagement. Then end it, my brother said immediately. Tomorrow I will throw every gift Xiao Chengyu ever sent you into the street. Father glared at him. An imperial engagement cannot be ended merely because you wish it. That does not mean Zaiwi must endure humiliation. My brother paced twice across the room. The second prince was surrounded by guards. Yet everyone questioned Zaiwi for not taking the arrow. She is his betrothed, not his bodyguard.
My nose stung.
My brother had protected me like this in my previous life as well. But back then, I had been determined to believe Xiao Chongyu. I had urged my brother not to act rashly and not to offend the imperial family. With my own hands, I had pushed away the people who loved me most. Father, I said, there was something wrong with that arrow. His expression sharpened. I told him everything I had observed. Xiao Chongyu had clearly seen the arrow, yet he had not moved. Not one of his guards had acted in time. The imperial physician had produced the antidote without examining the poison. Afterward, noble consort Jia had shown no interest in the assassin's identity. She had only demanded to know why I had fallen. Shinruin had also insisted that I should have taken the arrow. Father's face darkened with every word. You believe the assassination was false. I have no proof. I couldn't tell him what had happened in my previous life. But even if the attack was real, the second prince's conduct and noble consort Jia's attitude show that neither of them values my life. I dare not marry such a man. Silence filled the room. Father raised a hand to his brow. Zhou'er, were you not once deeply fond of the second prince? I looked at the dim lamp beside my bed. I was. I am not anymore. Father seemed ready to ask another question, but eventually, he only sighed. Very well. If you do not wish to marry him, I will find a way. My brother struck the table with his palm. Why find a way? We should enter the palace tomorrow and demand an annulment. Father glared at him again. Do you imagine the emperor is one of your drinking companions? My brother closed his mouth. I will go myself tomorrow. I said. The palace summoned me the following morning. Xiao Chongyu had awakened. He had asked the emperor and empress to judge the matter and requested to see me. I dressed in plain robes and wore no cosmetics. When I entered Qingming Hall, Xiao Chongyu was reclining against a cushioned couch. Thick white bandages covered his shoulder and chest, and his face was pale from blood loss. The wound was real. When he saw me, familiar tenderness immediately filled his eyes. Zaiwei. I stopped 3 paces away and bowed. I greet the second prince. The hand he had lifted toward me froze in midair. When we were alone, I had once called him Brother Changgu. Only after years of marriage in my previous life had I learned that when gentle words were offered too freely, some people began to consider them their natural right. The emperor sat at the head of the hall, his expression unreadable. The empress and noble consort sat on either side. Xin Wan stood beside Xiao Cheng's couch, holding a bowl of medicine. She wore a pale pink palace dress. In her hair was the pearl hairpin Xiao Chongyu had once given me. It had still been inside my dressing case yesterday. My stepmother must have taken it for her. Zaiwei, Xiao Chongyu said gently. You were badly frightened yesterday. Were you not? Yes. Do not worry. I do not blame you. He spoke with magnanimous forgiveness. Noble consort Jia immediately added. The first thing he asked after awakening was whether you had been injured. He cares for you so deeply. You must not speak such foolish words about ending the engagement again. I slowly sank to my knees. Your Majesty, Your Highnesses, I came today precisely to speak about ending the engagement. Expressions changed throughout the hall. The tenderness on Xiao Chongyu's face finally cracked. Zaiwei, do not behave willfully. I am not being willful. I bowed low. As the second prince's betrothed, I thought only of protecting myself when danger came. My conduct is clearly unworthy. I am so cowardly that should another crisis arise after our marriage, I fear I will once again fail to share His Highness's danger. I ask Your Majesty to release us from the engagement and choose for the second prince a brave and loyal woman who is willing to sacrifice her life for him. By the time my final words fell, noble consort Jia's face was almost livid. The empress's lips appeared to curve ever so slightly. Xiao Chongyu said, I have already told you that I do not blame you. But I blame myself. I raised my head, my eyes red. The more forgiving Your Highness is, the more ashamed I become. I cannot shamelessly continue occupying the place of your principal consort. If he continued insisting on marrying me, he would be admitting that he wished to marry a woman who had supposedly fled from danger and abandoned him. But if he agreed to release me, he would lose the Shin family's wealth and connections. Xiao Chongyu valued his reputation above almost everything. I intended to use that reputation to bind his hands. As expected, he fell silent. Noble consort Jia could not restrain herself. How can a marriage be abandoned over one moment of fear? Your engagement has been known throughout the capital for 3 years. Everyone knows how deeply you love one another. That is precisely why I cannot allow His Highness to be humiliated, I said quietly. Enough, the Emperor said at last. His gaze moved between Xiao Chongyu and me. Only 1 day has passed since the spring banquet. Miss Shan remains shaken, and the second prince has not recovered. This is not the proper time to decide a marriage. The wedding will be postponed for 3 months. After 3 months, I will hear your answers again. Noble consort Jia was plainly dissatisfied, but she dared not object. Xiao Chongyu looked at me. Zaiwei, 3 months will be enough for you to think clearly. I bowed to the Emperor. Thank you for your mercy, Your Majesty. When I rose to leave the hall, my knees were weak from kneeling. I descended the long stone steps and slipped. A hand caught my arm. I looked up.
Sia Linwan stood beside me.
He wore a dark teal robe and was accompanied by 2 instructors from the academy. Apparently, he was on his way into the palace to discuss official matters. Thank you, Your Grace. Once I regained my balance, I tried to withdraw my arm. He didn't immediately release me. You knelt steadily enough inside the hall. Ending the engagement was worth it. Sia Linwan studied me for a moment. The faintest curve appeared at the corner of his mouth. Indeed. He released me and drew something from his sleeve. It was the white jade earring I had lost in the Imperial Garden. I found it yesterday. I accepted it. Why return it only today? Miss Shan was occupied with being unconscious. Yesterday. I had no answer. He walked past me, the quiet fragrance of sandalwood trailing from his sleeve. 3 months. Xiao Chongyu probably believed that 3 months would be enough for me to remember his kindness and return to him. He didn't understand. Those 3 months were not time for me to look back. They were time for me to reclaim everything the Shin family had placed in his hands. The first thing I did after returning home was unlock the storehouse containing my mother's dowry. 12 brass locks opened one after another. When the heavy wooden doors swung inward, the scent of old timber drifted out. My mother had been born into a wealthy merchant family from Jiangnan. When she married into the Marquis estate, she brought an immense dowry. There were 3 bookshops in the capital, 2 tea houses, a paper shop, several tea estates in Jiangnan, and fields of mulberry trees. After her death, I inherited them in name, though my father had continued managing them for me ever since. My engagement to Xiao Chenggu, father had quietly allowed several of the businesses to serve the second prince's household. The paper and ink used at his literary gatherings came free from my shops. The rare tea he served scholars came from my estates. Even the essays praising him as a generous patron of talent were printed by the bookshops my mother had left me. In my previous life, I had never questioned it. I believed that husband and wife were one, and that what belonged to me naturally belonged to him. Later, I learned that husband and wife are one was merely something he said when taking what was mine. When he married Xin Ruan, he had never thought of sharing even half his honor with me. My lady, these are the full accounts from the past 3 years. Uncle Chung, the elderly manager who had served my mother, placed a thick stack of ledgers on the table. Most of his hair had turned white. He looked hesitant. Should we continue sending goods to the second prince's residence this month? No. He stared at me. I opened the first ledger. From today onward, close every account connected to the second prince's residence. Collect every tael of silver they owe us. And if they refuse to pay, stop all deliveries. Uncle Chung watched me for a long moment, his eyes suddenly reddening. If the late mistress were still alive, she would be overjoyed to see you finally taking charge. My fingers paused. In my previous life, I had died without ever truly examining these ledgers. My mother had left me more than a dowry before she departed this world. She had prepared a road of escape for her daughter. I had taken that road apart, stone by stone, and laid it beneath Xiao Chongyu's feet, so he could climb higher. I was foolish before, I said. closing the ledger. I will not be foolish again. That afternoon, the steward of the second prince's residence arrived at the bookshop. His surname was Ju. Because he worked for an imperial prince, he had never behaved like an outsider in any business belonging to the Shin family. The moment he entered, he slapped an order sheet onto the counter. His Highness is holding a literary gathering in 3 days. Prepare the usual 500 poetry collections, 100 blocks of superior hui ink, and 50 bundles of Changzhen paper. Uncle Chung remained seated behind the counter. He didn't even lift his eyes. Steward Ju must settle the previous accounts first. The steward looked as though he had not understood. What previous accounts? I descended from the upper floor. In the past 3 years, the second prince's residence has taken paper, ink, and printed books worth 6,872 taels. For the sake of our past relationship, I am willing to forgive the smaller change. Steward Ju's expression changed. Miss Shin, your engagement to His Highness has not yet been dissolved. That is precisely why the accounts should be settled. I approached the counter. Otherwise, people may say that before His Highness has even married me, he has already begun spending my dowry. Steward Ju lowered his voice. Is Miss Shan throwing a tantrum because of what happened at the spring banquet? If you do not leave immediately, I will have those words written on a board and displayed outside. The steward of the second prince's residence openly admits that His Highness has used his unmarried fiancée's dowry for 3 years and refuses to allow her to collect the debt. Several customers in the shop were already watching us. Steward Ju didn't dare continue. He snatched up the order sheet and swept out. As he left, another group entered through the door. Xia Linwan walked at the front. Today, he wore no judicial court robes, only a simple dark gown. Uncle Chung rose at once. Your Grace. Xia Linwan inclined his head. Minga Academy is expanding this year. We need to select a new supplier of paper and ink. His gaze fell on the ledger before me. It seems Miss Shan is occupied. Not particularly. I am merely collecting a debt. Have you collected it? Not yet. Xia Linwan sat beside the table. Then collect it slowly. The instructors accompanying him brought out several samples of paper. We negotiated for the entire afternoon. Xia Linwan didn't offer a higher price because of my identity, nor did he behave like other aristocrats in the capital who cared only whether the paper looked elegant. He tested how each sheet absorbed ink and how easily it tore. He asked how much could be supplied reliably each year. In the end, he selected neither the most expensive cloud pattern paper nor the most beautiful variety. He chose the cheapest and most durable bamboo paper. Most students at the academy come from ordinary families, he explained. Paper is meant to be written on, not admired from a distance. I looked at him differently. Your Grace is not quite like the rumors. What do the rumors say? That you are cold and difficult to approach. And now I push the contract toward him. Now I believe Your Grace is exceptionally skilled at forcing down prices. Xia Linwan glanced at the figure. Miss Shan's price is 10% higher than the market rate. Minga Academy settles its accounts once every 3 months and has never delayed a payment. I said, the second prince's residence delayed payment for 3 years. Naturally, I must recover the loss elsewhere. He lifted his eyes. After a moment, he picked up the brush and signed his name. Your Grace will not bargain further. I am supporting Miss Shan's efforts to collect her debt. A laugh escaped me. It was the first time I had truly laughed since my rebirth. Xia Linwan seemed to pause. He quickly looked away and handed me the signed contract. Deliver the first shipment to the academy tomorrow morning. So soon, the students need it. As he spoke, he glanced outside the shop. A young girl who had brought lunch for her grandfather stood on her toes, peering through the paper window at an instructor testing ink. She looked 11 or 12. A food box rested in her arms, and her lips moved soundlessly as she followed the words written on the paper. Can she read? Xia Linwan asked. Uncle Ching nodded. She is a Tang, the granddaughter of one of our oldest workers. She can keep simple accounts and recognizes many characters. Her family will not allow a girl to attend school, so she listens from the shop whenever she has the chance. Realizing we were watching, a Tang flushed and lowered her head. I thought of the ledgers my mother had left behind. If my mother had never learned to read or keep accounts, she could not have prepared the road that now allowed me to escape. There are 2 unused rooms behind the bookshop, I said. On each rest day, girls who wish to learn may come here. Uncle Cheng stared at me. Xia Linwan turned as well. Who will teach them, he asked. I can begin with arithmetic and accounting. Uncle Cheng can teach commonly used characters. There are several elderly female instructors at Minga Academy, Xia Linwan said. I can ask them whether they agree. The decision will remain their own. At that time it was only 2 unused rooms, several old desks, and a dozen thin books. I did not yet know that the Minga Women's Academy would one day grow from that little courtyard, a courtyard where the roof leaked in the rain and the winter wind slipped through the walls. I carefully put away the contract. Are you not afraid I will fail to supply the academy? I am. He rose. So Miss Shin should not become so occupied with ending her engagement that she neglects my paper. After he left, Uncle Chung studied me for a long while. My lady, the Duke of Angua appears surprisingly easy to speak with. I looked at the strong, elegant handwriting on the contract. He merely separates public business from private feeling. Uncle Chung smiled but said nothing. That evening, another messenger arrived from the second prince's residence. This time, he carried a letter written by Xiao Chenggu himself. It contained only a few lines. He claimed he had not known that his servants had delayed payment to the Shan businesses and had already ordered Steward Ju to be punished. He added that the literary gathering in 3 days would be his first public appearance since his injury. He hoped I would not cause him to break his promise to his guests. At the end, he wrote as he always had, I know you would never truly abandon me. I read it twice. Then I held the paper over the candle. Flames licked across his handwriting and swallowed the final sentence. In my previous life, I truly would never have abandoned him. That was why he had dared to claim my possessions again and again. He had treated my concessions like a well that could never run dry. But the well was empty. From now on, every mouthful he took would have to be paid for it. On the 5th day of Shinruin's stay in the palace, she sent servants home 3 times to collect more clothes. The first time, she claimed noble consort Jia considered her robes too plain and inauspicious. The second time, she said Xiao Chongyu had coughed during the night and stained the hem of her dress with blood. The third time, she demanded the set of Eastern pearls from my dressing case. The maid delivering the message stood before me stammering. Second Miss says there are many people in the palace. She cannot embarrass the Marquis estate. I continued examining my ledger. What happened to her own jewelry? Second Miss says it is not valuable enough. Then she may return home. The maid dropped to her knees in alarm. Second Miss is highly favored by noble consort Jia. If she dresses too poorly, perhaps what? I put down my brush. She entered the palace to nurse the second prince in my place, not to participate in the selection of a consort. Someone coughed softly outside the room. My stepmother, Madame Fong, entered. An elderly servant behind her carried the Eastern pearl ornaments. Zaiwi, it is only one set of jewelry. One represents the Marquis estate inside the palace. Naturally, she must dress appropriately. Madame Fong had been married to my father for 10 years. On the surface, she had never treated me harshly. My food and clothing had never been reduced. Physicians were called when I fell ill. Yet, whenever something truly valuable was involved, she always found a reason to give it to Xin Wan first. In my previous life, I had comforted myself by saying that she simply loved her own daughter. Favoring one's child was not a crime. But she had no right to use my possessions to satisfy that love while demanding that I sympathize with her motherly devotion. My mother left those pearls to me. I looked at Madame Fong. Before Wan entered the palace, I sent her 2 new sets of jewelry. If she considers them inadequate, she can purchase more with her own allowance. Madame Fong frowned. Why must sisters separate everything so clearly? If there is no need for separation, why does mother not send Wan something from her own dowry? Her expression shifted. You have managed the accounts for only a few days. Yet you are entirely different from before. I did not understand before, I said calmly. Now I do. Madame Fong looked at me as if she were seeing her stepdaughter for the first time. In the end, she didn't mention the pearls again. She ordered the servant to leave with them, her face cold. That night, Xin Ruan returned home in person. Her eyes were red, and her pink palace dress was badly wrinkled. "Sister." The instant she entered, she knelt before me. "Have I done something wrong? What could you possibly have done wrong? Why will you not lend me the Eastern pearl ornaments?" She raised her face, timing her tears perfectly. The palace maid serving noble consort Jia laughed at me for looking poor. I represent the Marquis estate. When they laugh at me, they are laughing at father and at you. In my previous life, I would already have softened. I had always feared disharmony within the family. I had feared being accused of resenting my younger sister. All Xin Ruan needed to do was cry, and I would retreat. "If the palace causes you such humiliation, do not return tomorrow." Her crying stopped, but the second prince cannot do without someone beside him. The palace has physicians, maids, and eunuchs. You are an unmarried young woman remaining beside an imperial prince's bed every day. It is indeed improper. Noble consort Jia asked me to stay. Then ask noble consort Jia to reward you with jewelry. Her face gradually reddened. I lifted my teacup. "Is there anything else?" Xin Ruan stared at me. For the first time, she failed to conceal the resentment in her eyes. "Sister never sincerely wanted me to nurse His Highness in your place. You only wanted to watch me embarrass myself." I smiled. "You were the one who volunteered to lighten my burden. Now you have the opportunity to remain beside the second prince every day. Is that not precisely what you wanted?" Her head snapped up. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing." I set down the cup. "I am only reminding you that since you chose this road, you must continue walking it yourself." She returned to the palace in the end. She didn't wear my Eastern pearls. Instead, she wore a set of ruby ornaments Madame Fong had purchased for her overnight. 2 days later, the second prince held his literary gathering as planned. Because I had stopped supplying paper, ink, and tea, Steward Ju was forced to purchase everything elsewhere at the last moment. The paper delivered to the residence was coarse. Ink spread the moment it touched the surface. The tea came from the previous year and smelled faintly of mildew after brewing. Several celebrated scholars left immediately. The new collection of poems Xiao Chenggu intended to present was also incomplete because my bookshop refused to print it for free on short notice. Fewer than 30 copies were available. By that afternoon, the story had spread throughout the capital. Some praised the second prince for living frugally. Far more people remarked that he could not even organize a literary gathering properly and that his previous elegance had probably existed only because someone else had paid to maintain it. That evening, another letter arrived from Xiao Changyu. This one was no longer gentle. He demanded to know how long I intended to continue this foolishness. He wrote that since the Xin family was already bound to him through marriage, money should not be divided so rigidly between us. After reading it, I sent the outstanding invoices back with the messenger. 3 days later, Xia Linwan came to inspect the second shipment of paper. I told him about the disastrous literary gathering. He was testing a new ink stick. The paper and ink previously used by the second prince all came from Miss Xin. Yes. Did he pay? No. Xia Linwan raised his eyes. Then you were not supplying him. You were supporting him. Heat rose to my ears. In my previous life, everyone had praised me for being virtuous and generous. Viewed from another angle, I had merely used the dowry my mother left me to support a man who imagined himself a refined patron of the arts. Xia Linwan handed me the sheet on which he had tested the ink. Only 2 words were written there. Cut losses. Is your grace teaching me how to conduct business? No. He returned the brush to its stand. I merely believe Miss Xin has taken a wise step. I studied the words before asking, what if one has already invested too much in something, would abandoning it now not make every previous sacrifice meaningless? Precisely because one has already invested too much, one must not continue making the same mistake. Otherwise, what is lost will not be limited to the past. He looked at me. It will include the rest of one's life. I folded the sheet and placed it inside my sleeve. Sunset spilled across the street beyond the window. I remembered asking myself the same question when I had been at my sickest in my previous life. Should I abandon Xiao Changyu? But I had always thought that I had loved him for too many years. I had already taken an arrow for him. I had already lost my health for him. If I surrendered, would that not make everything I had suffered a joke? And so, to prove that I had not chosen wrongly, I sacrificed the remainder of my life as well. Now Xia Linwan had given me a different answer. Admitting that one had chosen the wrong path was not shameful. The truly terrible thing was to see the abyss ahead and continue walking toward it merely because one could not bear to abandon what had already been spent. Half a month later, Xiao Changyu came to the Marquis estate in person. His wound had not fully healed. His face still carried the pallor of someone who had lost too much blood. Father received him in the front hall. When the news reached me, I was in the study checking Minga Academy's supply order for the coming season. My lady, the maid said cautiously, the second prince wishes to speak with you alone. He also brought your favorite osmanthus cakes. I had once loved them. Whenever Xiao Changyu and I quarreled, he would send me a box of osmanthus cakes. He never asked why I was hurt. He never solved the problem that had caused the quarrel. As long as I accepted the cakes, everything was considered forgiven. Eventually, he stopped bringing them himself. He would simply send a servant with the same message. Zaiwei has always been sensible. Take him to the flower hall, I said. I changed my clothes and made my way there at an unhurried pace. Xiao Changyu stood beside the window. The familiar box of osmanthus cakes rested on the table. Beside it sat a white jade case. When I entered, his expression softened. Zaiwei, you have grown thinner. I sat across from him. If your highness has something to say, please say it directly. His expression stiffened for a moment. When did we become so distant? We are not yet married. It is only proper that I observe the appropriate courtesy. Xiao Changyu was silent for a moment. Then he opened the jade case. Inside lay a pendant carved with a dragon. It was the token he had personally given me when our engagement was arranged. In my previous life, I had kept it beside my pillow until the day I died. I have thought about many things these past few days, he said. He looked at me. You are simply frightened at the spring banquet. I should not have allowed Mother to pressure you into entering the palace. The failure of the literary gathering was also the fault of ignorant servants. I have ordered the unpaid accounts to be settled. Zaiwei, let us stop fighting. His voice remained gentle. Had I not once seen him coldly pry my fingers from his sleeve one by one, perhaps that gentleness would still have moved me. Did your highness come because the literary gathering was a disaster, or because the Shin family stopped supplying your residence? He frowned. Do you truly believe money is all I care about? Is it not? I care about you. He stepped closer. We have known each other for 4 years. You know better than anyone how I have treated you. When you were ill, I once waited outside the palace gates for an entire night. On the anniversary of your mother's death, I stayed beside you until dawn. When you said you missed the plum blossoms of Jiangnan, I ordered them transplanted into my residence. Zaiwei, can a single accident erase every feeling between us? I looked at him. It would be a lie to say my heart did not stir at all. Those moments of kindness had not all been false. The hot tea outside the ancestral hall had been real. His company on the night of my mother's memorial had been real. That was precisely why I had lost so completely in my previous life. Your highness has treated me kindly before. I will not deny it. I spoke slowly. But because someone once handed me a cup of hot tea, it does not mean he has the right to place a poisoned arrow before me later. You did give me plum blossoms. But whenever your highness remembered what I liked, you also happened to need the Shin family's money, my father's influence, or my brother's assistance. His lips parted slightly. You are twisting everything from the past into something ugly. Perhaps I am. I met his eyes. But what awakened me was not whether your gentleness had once been real. It was the fact that you knew I would be hurt and still considered my injury an acceptable price. His expression darkened inch by inch. What exactly are you trying to say? I am only reminding your highness of something. I lifted the jade pendant from its case. Some things once appeared precious. Now that I look again, they are nothing extraordinary. I place the pendant back in his palm. I return your token. When the 3 months are over, I will still ask the Emperor to dissolve our engagement. Xiao Chongyu's fingers closed violently around the pendant, its sharp edge pressed into his palm until his knuckles whitened. Is this because of Xia Linwan? I had not expected him to mention that name. The Duke of Angua has nothing to do with this. He has been visiting your bookshop frequently. We have business dealings. You used to dislike commerce. I did not understand it before.
He stared at me.
The last trace of tenderness vanished from his eyes. Zaiwi, you have changed. Your Highness never truly knew me. Footsteps sounded outside the flower hall, led by the steward. Xia Linwan entered the courtyard. A rolled architectural plan rested in his hand. When he saw Xiao Chongyu, he gave a restrained bow. Your Highness. The Duke of Angua has arrived at a remarkably convenient moment, Xiao Chongyu said. Indeed. Xia Linwan looked at me. The windows for the new women's school need to be measured before we select the paper. I rose. You brought the plans. I did. We spread the plans across the table. Xiao Chongyu remained standing nearby. Xia Linwan behaved as though he had not noticed the prince's displeasure at all. He pointed to several windows and discussed with me what kind of paper should be used. I examined the plan. The women's school does not receive enough light. We cannot use paper that is too thick. Bamboo paper allows in more light, but it will not keep out the winter cold. Then use 2 layers. We continued speaking back and forth, giving Xiao Chongyu no further attention. After a long while, he finally said, Zaiwi, think carefully about what I have said. I did not look up. There is nothing left to consider. His footsteps paused. Then he left heavily. Only when the courtyard gate closed again did Xia Linwan glance at the box of osmanthus cakes on the table. A gift from the second prince. Yes. Miss Shan does not intend to eat them. I once liked them. I do not anymore. Xia Linwan opened the box and took one. I was surprised. Your Grace enjoys osmanthus cakes. He tasted it. His brow immediately furrowed. Too sweet. Then why eat it? I wanted to know what you used to like. Something brushed lightly against my heart. He placed the uneaten half back in the box. What do you like now? I paused. Preserved plum candy. Xia Linwan nodded. The next day, Minga Academy sent over a new order. Along with it came a small paper packet of preserved plum candy. There was no name. Only one line had been written on the wrapping. No unpaid debts. I placed one of the candies in my mouth. The sourness came first. Afterward, there was a faint sweetness. The invitation to noble consort Jaw's flower viewing banquet arrived while I was examining a newly printed primer for the women's school. It had been written on the finest gold-flecked paper from the palace. The wording was gracious. Noble consort Jaw claimed that concern over Xiao Chongyu's injury had made her speak too sharply and hoped I would not take offense. She also wrote that Xin Wan had worked tirelessly while attending the prince and invited the women of the Marquis household to enter the palace together. After reading the invitation, I ordered my servants to prepare my plainest dress. My stepmother arrived at my courtyard with Xin Wan before we left. After half a month in the palace, Xin Wan looked noticeably exhausted. There were dark shadows beneath her eyes and a small burn on the back of her hand. Yet a new golden hair ornament swayed from her hair. Sister, she smiled the moment she saw me. Noble consort Jaw gave this to me. I glanced at it. It was finely made, but it did not resemble the standard work of the imperial workshops. It looked more like something from the storerooms of Xiao Chongyu's residence. I had seen it after a marriage in my previous life. A local official had once sent it as a gift for one of the women of the second prince's household. Its design had been considered vulgar, so no one had ever worn it. It suits you, I said. Shinruin's smile deepened. My stepmother, however, frowned at the dress I had prepared. How can you attend a palace flower banquet dressed so plainly? Did noble consort Jaw not call it a private family gathering? Even at a private gathering, we must not disgrace ourselves. I did not change. Only after entering the palace did I discover that nearly every titled woman and unmarried noble lady in the capital had been invited. Before the banquet even began, Someone deliberately brought up the previous spring gathering. Miss Shawn must have been terribly frightened that day. The speaker was Madame Ka, a relative from noble consort Jaw's maternal family. She hid her mouth behind a round silk fan. I heard Miss Shawn collapsed beside the second prince the moment he was struck. Another woman added, "Young ladies are naturally timid. Still, after marrying into the imperial family, one must be able to share both fortune and danger with one's husband." Several ambiguous laughs sounded around us. Seated below noble consort Jia, Xinhuan immediately spoke in a soft voice. Sister did not mean to abandon His Highness. She was simply too frightened. The words appeared to defend me. In truth, they made the accusation that I was cowardly and selfish sound even more certain. Noble consort Jia lifted her teacup and did nothing to stop them. I had already understood that this was not a simple flower banquet. Before the 3-month delay ended, she needed to force me to lower my head. If the entire capital believed I had failed Xiao Chongyu, then I would have no way to prove my loyalty except by marrying him. You are all correct, I said with a smile. I was indeed terrified that day. They had not expected me to admit it. The garden fell briefly silent. At my signal, Chundao unrolled a painted scroll. I had recreated the seating arrangement from the spring banquet. The positions of Xiao Chongyu, myself, the Imperial Guards, and the other guests were all marked clearly. I have reflected deeply these past few days. I walked beside the scroll. I am only a weak woman. I saw an arrow and fainted from fear. It was certainly disappointing. Therefore, I would like to ask everyone present for guidance. These 8 men beside the second prince were highly trained guards selected by the palace. Why were all 8 standing more than 30 feet away when the arrow was fired? Several women looked more closely at the painting. I pointed to 2 marked positions. These 2 guards even retreated toward the flower wall before the arrow came, conveniently avoiding its path. And then there was this imperial physician. He was already waiting nearby with his medical case before the banquet began. The instant the second prince was struck, he produced the antidote. I have often regretted that I failed to remain as calm as the guards and physician. The garden became so quiet that only the wind moving through the leaves could be heard. I did not accuse anyone of arranging a false assassination. I merely raised questions that anyone could understand. The suspicious gazes that had been fixed upon me gradually shifted toward noble consort Jia. Madame Ka laughed awkwardly. How could women like us understand the arrangement of palace guards? Madame is correct. I rolled up the scroll. That is why I am merely curious. Perhaps everything was only a coincidence. The word coincidence only deepened their suspicion. Noble consort Jia's face darkened. Did Miss Shawn bring this drawing into the palace today to suggest something? I would not dare. I bowed. These past few days, everyone has asked why I failed to save the second prince. I have considered the question again and again, but I still do not understand. So many people were responsible for protecting His Highness. None of them acted in time. Why then was I the only one condemned? The Empress seated above us finally spoke. She makes a fair point. She placed down her teacup. The matter of the spring banquet has not been resolved. From this day onward, no one is to discuss it again. Noble consort Jia forced a smile. Your Majesty is correct. The humiliation prepared for me ended before it could truly begin. After the banquet, I followed the covered corridor through the imperial gardens. At the turn, Xinhuan hurried after me. Sister, she lowered her voice. Why did you deliberately embarrass noble consort Jia? Today, I was defending myself. But by doing that, you've placed the second prince in an even more difficult position. I glanced at the burn on the back of her hand. Has caring for His Highness been difficult? She immediately hid her hand inside her sleeve. Not at all. His Highness treats me very well. I am glad to hear it. I turned to leave, but she blocked my path again. Sister, do you know something? I stopped. What should I know? Her face turned pale. She did not answer. In that instant, I became even more certain. Before the spring banquet, she had known part of the plan. Perhaps noble consort Jia had not told her everything, but she had certainly instructed Xinhuan on how to make me feel guilty afterward. I was about to question her again when someone appeared at the other end of the corridor. Xia Linwan walked toward us with a book in his hand, accompanied by a palace eunuch. Xin Wan immediately stepped back and resumed her obedient expression. Your Grace. Xia Linwan inclined his head. His gaze passed over me and settled briefly on her. His second miss is not returning to the banquet. I only came to see my sister off. She bowed and left at once she had gone. Xia Linwan handed me the book. The new textbook for the women's school. Your Grace came specially to deliver it. I was passing by. I opened the book. A thin sheet of paper had been tucked inside the first page. It contained a drawing of the seating arrangement at the spring banquet. It was almost identical to mine except for one additional mark. Xia Linwan had been seated behind me and slightly to my right, exactly where I had fallen when I pretended to faint. Your Grace had already drawn this on the second day after the banquet. Why did you not tell me? You had already noticed the irregularities. I looked up at him. Then Your Grace also believes there was something wrong with the assassination. He did not answer directly. I only know that the second prince saw the arrow before it reached him. He chose not to move. My fingers tightened around the paper. For the first time, someone had confirmed that my memory was not a delusion born from rebirth. Why are you willing to tell me? Because if I had not arrived today, Miss Shin would probably have continued circling around the subject with her sister. I was testing her. And the result? She was afraid. Xia Linwan looked in the direction Xin Wan had gone. Fear means she knows more than you believe. We walked side by side toward the palace gate. Spring light filtered through the corridor and scattered across the ground. As we neared the gate, he suddenly said, You handled today well. I turned toward him. Which part? You did not allow them to place you in the position of the accused. My step slowed. In my previous life, whenever someone blamed me, my first instinct had always been to examine myself. Had I not been sensible enough, generous enough, considerate enough in this life, I had finally learned to ask a different question. Why should I? 3 days after the flower banquet, the Ministry of Revenue suddenly suspended its funding for Minga Academy. The official reason was written with great dignity. The Academy's new division for female students had not yet established clear regulations, so further expansion should be delayed. But the man who delivered the document had visited the second prince's residence the night before. Xia Linwan placed the document in front of me. His expression was colder than usual. Minga Academy has more than 400 students from poor families, he said. Most of their paper, meals, and reduced tuition depend on court funding. So the women's school must stop, only for 1 month. He continued, I must first fill the shortage in the original academy. The trust that had begun to grow inside me suddenly felt pierced. Your Grace also believes that women's education can always be postponed. Xia Linwan raised his eyes. I believe we cannot use the food of 400 students merely to prove how strongly I support you. But once we retreat, they will know that stopping the academy's funding is enough to force us to surrender.
No.
Then you still intend to delay it, Shinji, his voice deepened. You may risk your own properties. I may mortgage the estates belonging to the Duke of Angwa's household. But Minga Academy is not our private possession. It was our first true argument. I turned and walked toward the door. Before I stepped outside, he spoke again. I am not abandoning the women's school. I need one day to calculate a safe road for everyone involved. Early the next morning, Xia Linwan sent me 3 contracts. The first allocated 3 years of rent from 2 residences in the Eastern District to the academy. The second was a joint agreement signed by several instructors who had volunteered to reduce their own salaries. The third was blank. It was for me. The academy cannot be supported by one person alone, he said. If you still wish to open the women's school, the Shin family can provide the paper, ink, and textbooks. The Duke of Angwa's household will cover the meals. The instructors will temporarily reduce their pay. When the court funding is restored, everyone will be reimbursed proportionally. I looked at the faint shadows beneath his eyes. He had probably remained awake the entire night. I spoke too harshly yesterday. You were not wrong, he said. If no one had forced me to take another step forward, I might truly have chosen the safest road first. Your Grace is afraid as well. I am. He looked through the window at the girls carrying desks into the courtyard. I am afraid my decisions will harm innocent people. I picked up the brush and wrote the Shin family's contribution on the third contract. Then we will calculate everything together. The women's school was not delayed, nor was the price forced upon any single person. The day before Mingda Women's School was scheduled to open, heavy rain descended over the capital. 3,000 newly printed primers had not yet been delivered to the academy. If the rain ruined them, the opening would be delayed, and the bookshop would suffer a considerable loss. By the time the news reached me, the carts carrying the books were trapped in a low-lying lane in the southern part of the city. My lady, you cannot go. Chando blocked the doorway. The water outside is already above the knee. Half the books are still on the carts. The workers can move them. There are not enough people. I put on a straw rain cloak and gathered every available servant from the estate. Rain struck the stone street so violently that white mist rose from the ground. Several carts had become stuck in the mud. Some of the book chests had already been carried beneath the eaves of a nearby tea house. I directed the workers to break open the soaked outer crates and move the books that had not yet absorbed water. Halfway through the work, floodwater from farther up the street broke through a wooden barrier. A cart still loaded with books began sliding toward the deeper end of the lane. A young apprentice from the bookshop, no more than 10 years old, stood beside it. I did not have time to think. I seized a rope tied beside the road and rushed toward him. My lady. The water struck my legs. I nearly lost my footing. Just as I caught the child, an arm locked around my waist from behind and dragged both of us onto the stone steps. The next instant, the cart slammed into the corner of a wall. One wheel shattered. Wooden crates burst open and scattered across the water. I leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe. Xia Linwan stood before me. His robes were soaked through. Water ran from his brow, and his face was colder than the storm. Shin Zaiwi. It was the first time he had called me directly by name. What were you doing, saving someone? There were more than a dozen workers nearby. The child was closest to you, so you ran into the flood. His voice was not loud, but anger tightened every word. My temper rose in response. Was I supposed to stand there and watch the cart crush him? You could have shouted. You could have thrown him the rope. You could have secured your footing first. Running directly into danger was not your only choice. I pressed my lips together. Xia Linwan turned away. He ordered someone to take the terrified apprentice to change his clothing. Then he arranged for students from the academy to assist with the remaining crates. Within moments, the disorder was brought under control. After the final books had been carried into the tea house, he took me to his carriage. Dry clothing and hot tea had already been prepared inside. He tossed a towel toward me. Dry yourself. I did not move. If your grace believes I have caused trouble for the academy, the Shin family will bear the losses. Xia Linwan looked at me. Do you think I am speaking about money? Then what are you angry about? You truly do not know. No. Rain pounded against the carriage roof like 100 drums. We stared at one another for a long time. Xia Linwan finally raised a hand and pressed his fingers against his brow. At the spring banquet, you avoided the arrow without hesitation. I thought you valued your life. Of course I value it. Do you? His gaze settled on the scratches across my arm. You merely refuse to sacrifice yourself for the second prince now. But you still believe that if it is for your family, your workers, or a box of books, your own life may be placed last. Something struck heavily inside my chest. That is different. How that child could have died. So could you. At least it was my choice.
Xia Linwan fell silent.
Zaiwi, choosing to sacrifice yourself does not mean sacrifice is your only choice. I gripped the towel in my hands. Your grace has never experienced what I have. It is easy for you to speak. The instant the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Xia Linwan's mother had died young. He might understand loss better than I imagined. He did not become angry. You are correct. I do not know why you suddenly stopped loving the second prince. I do not know why you behave as though you already knew he would hurt you. But I do know one thing. He looked directly at me. Valuing your own life is not selfish. Someone who truly cares for you will not demand that you prove your courage through your wounds. And he will not demand that you prove your love with your life. My eyes suddenly burned. When the poison had been at its worst in my previous life, I had once asked Xiao Chongyu whether he would still arrange the arrow if he could choose again. He had answered yes because it had been the smallest price. I had been that smallest priced Xia Linwan. It was the first time I spoke his name. If someone knows you will save him and deliberately chooses not to move, what would you call that? His eyes changed slightly. He did not ask whom I meant.
Exploitation.
What if the arrow might kill you? Murder. But he said it was because he trusted me. To trust your sincerity and to exploit your sincerity are two different things. I lowered my head. A tear landed on the back of my hand, mingling with the rainwater I had not yet wiped away. He did not comfort me. He did not force me to lift my face. He merely placed a clean handkerchief beside my hand. After a long time, I said, I acted impulsively today. Yes. Could your grace not say that more gently? No. I looked up at him in irritation. The anger had left his face. A faint smile appeared in his eyes. Most of the books were saved, he said. That is good. The child is unharmed as well. I released a breath. Xia Linwan handed me a small packet. I opened it. Preserved plum candy. Why does your grace always keep candy in your carriage? It was meant for the orphanage today. Then have I stolen candy from children? Where was this careful conscience when you ran into the flood? I put one candy in my mouth. It was so sour that my face tightened. Xia Linwan looked at me. Then he laughed. The smile was brief, but it softened the severe lines of his face. I turned toward the rain beyond the carriage window. The pain accumulated over 2 lifetimes had not disappeared. But for the first time, someone had told me that my existence alone was important. I did not need to take an arrow for anyone. I did not need to rescue everyone. I did not need to sacrifice myself to prove that I deserved to be loved. Only 10 days remained before the 3-month period ended. Xiao Chongyu had nearly recovered from his injury. Yet, Xin Wan remained in the palace. Rumors about them had spread throughout the capital. Madame Fong had begun preparing a dowry for her daughter. She even attempted to take silver from the common funds of the Marquis estate that had been reserved for my marriage. This time, father did not pretend not to notice. He returned the request for funds with a single sentence. Ruan's dowry will be prepared according to the rules of the estate. If you wish to add more, use your own dowry. For the first time, Madame Fong truly panicked. At last, she understood that favoring her daughter was her own choice, but she would no longer be permitted to make the entire Marquis estate pay for it. That evening, my carriage stopped in a secluded alley as I returned from the bookshop. Xiao Chongyu stood in the road ahead. He had brought no ceremonial procession, only 2 attendants. Zaiwei, I want to speak with you. I did not leave the carriage. Your Highness may speak from there. He walked to the window. Ruan asked my mother to grant her the position of secondary consort. Congratulations, Your Highness. I did not agree. That is Your Highness's concern. His expression gradually darkened. You truly do not care at all. What am I supposed to care about? She is your sister. Precisely because she is my sister, it would be improper for me to interfere with her marriage. Xiao Chongyu stared at me. You deliberately sent her to my side to test me. I shook my head. Your Highness thinks too highly of himself. His hand pressed against the edge of a carriage window. Then why did you suddenly change? You were once willing to do anything for me. Is it because I was not injured in precisely the way you intended? My word struck something inside him. His expression changed instantly. That arrow would not have killed you. The alley fell silent. I stared at him through the window. Xiao Chengge seemed to realize what he had said. He quickly softened his voice. I only mean that if you had not fallen, the arrow might not have struck a vital place. How does Your Highness know that? I am merely making a reasonable guess. The arrow was poisoned. The imperial physician said the poison could be controlled. The imperial physician had prepared the antidote before the arrow struck you. His pupils contracted. I knew I had not imagined it. Xiao Chongyu. For the first time in this life, I called him directly by name. You knew the arrow was coming. Did you not? Nonsense. That is why you did not move. There was no time. Xia Linwan saw you. His face turned completely cold. Xia Linwan again. You are willing to place every crime upon me because of him. This has nothing to do with him. How could it have nothing to do with him? Xiao Changyu gripped the carriage window. You manage a women's school with him. You allow him to enter and leave your bookshop as he pleases. Even within the palace, people say you have become close. Zaiwei, you are my betrothed. Not for much longer. A nearly unfamiliar fury appeared in his eyes. No matter what he had done in the past, I had never rejected him so decisively. He had continued believing I was merely angry. Only now did he begin to feel genuine fear. I will not agree to dissolve the engagement. The Emperor will. Do you believe the Shin family can find a stronger patron after abandoning me? I laughed softly. Why must the Shin family depend on your highness at all? My father holds a hereditary title. My brother has his own future. I possess the businesses my mother left me. Without your highness, the Shin family will merely lose one customer who never pays his debts. His face turned livid. You were never so cruel before. And your highness never asked why I did not take the arrow for you. I looked directly at him. Now I will answer. The arrow was aimed at you. You were the one who should have endured it. He stood motionless for a long time. I lowered the curtain. The carriage began moving again. After we had traveled some distance, I lifted a corner of the curtain and glanced behind us. Xiao Changyu remained where I had left him. The setting sun stretched a shadow across the ground. In my previous life, I had chased that retreating figure countless times. Now, at last, he was the one standing behind me, watching me leave. That night, Xia Linwan came to the Marquis estate with the women's school accounts for its first month. I told him what had happened in the alley. His hand stopped on the page. Did the second prince admit it? Not entirely, but he said the arrow would not have killed me. Xia Linwan lifted his eyes. What do you intend to do? Make him say it again in front of everyone. He did not ask how I intended to accomplish it. What do you need from me? Nothing. Xia Linwan was silent for a moment. Very well. He agreed too quickly. I was almost surprised. Your Grace is not worried. I am. Then why not stop me? He closed the ledger. Because it is your decision. But if you intend to risk your life again, I will remove you before you have the chance. I could not help saying, is your Grace not interfering rather too much? Yes, he admitted it without hesitation. For a moment, I did not know how to answer. Xia Linwan drew a folded sheet from his sleeve and placed it on the table. The contract for the women's school's second term. I opened it. Why has the term been extended to 3 years? The academy requires a stable supply. Is that the only reason? Xia Linwan looked at me. There is also a personal reason. My heartbeat quickened. Yet he did not move closer or press me for an answer. You may consider it slowly. I only wish to make clear where I stand. Moonlight fell across his shoulder through the window. I lowered my eyes to the contract and did not look up for a long time. One man had called it love while asking me to take an arrow for him. Another admitted he had personal feelings yet returned every choice entirely to my hands. After my confrontation with Xiao Chenggu, the second prince's household soon began targeting the Shin family's businesses. First, tea shipments traveling from Jiangnan to the capital were seized by local officials who claimed the tax documents were incomplete. Then, several scholars who had worked with our bookshops for years suddenly terminated their contracts. Finally, even a fleet of Shin family grain boats carrying disaster relief provisions came under scrutiny. My brother was furious and wanted to confront Xiao Chenggu directly. I stopped him. If he wants to search for evidence against the Shin family, let him search. I ordered 2 sets of ledgers to be prepared. One was genuine. It recorded every expense related to the disaster relief grain and the women's school. The other contained several deliberately vague entries involving large sums of silver. At a glance, it appeared that the Shin family was transferring 100,000 taels to Jiangnan. I placed the false ledger in my study. Then I had Chunda mention it carelessly in front of Shin Ruan. Shin Ruan still had no formal status in the palace. Noble consort Jia had also begun to lose patience with her. She desperately needed to prove that she remained useful to Xiao Chenggu. That night, the ledger disappeared. I believed everything was proceeding according to plan. 3 days later, officials detained the Xin family's grain boats outside the city. Naturally, there was no silver aboard. There was only disaster relief grain with its destination clearly marked, along with court clerks assigned to verify the quantities. But I had not expected Xiao Chengyu to stop at the boats. Following an old seal that I had deliberately left in the false ledger, he led men directly into the bookshop. Uncle Chung was arrested for allegedly helping the Xin family transfer stolen silver. He was nearly 60 when they forced him into the prison cart. He fell and injured his leg. A Tang chased the cart for half a street, crying until her voice became hoarse. By the time I reached the magistrate's office, Uncle Chung had already been locked in a damp cell. When he saw me through the wooden bars, his first words were not an accusation. "My lady, did you hide the real ledgers safely?" The word struck me like a blow to the chest. I had believed I was merely using a false ledger to test Xiao Chenggu. But Uncle Chung, a Tang, and every worker in the bookshop had never known that I had placed them inside my scheme as well. The difference between Xiao Chengyu and me was supposed to be that I would not treat another person's life and safety as an acceptable price. Yet this time, I had made the same mistake. That very night, I submitted the genuine accounts, the grain transport documents, and a complete explanation of how the false ledger had been created to the Court of Judicial Review. In doing so, I destroyed my own trap. If I had waited 2 more days, I might have followed the person who stole the ledger and uncovered more names connected to the second prince's household. But Uncle Chung could not remain in prison while I waited. He was released the following morning. His leg was not seriously injured, but he would need at least a month to recover. I went to receive him, personally. "Uncle Chung, I am sorry."
He stared at me.
I offered no excuses. I placed the false ledger there deliberately. I expected someone to steal it, but I did not think they would arrest you first. I brought this upon you. Uncle Chung was silent for a long time. Then he sighed. "If you are willing to admit your mistake, it is not too late. The late mistress left those businesses to give you a road of escape. She did not leave them so you could learn to use another person's escape route as bait." I lowered my head. His words weighed more heavily than any scolding could have done. From that day forward, before carrying out any plan, I summoned everyone who might be affected. I explained every possible risk. Those who wished to remain could remain. Those who did not could leave, and would still receive their full wages. When Xia Linwan learned what had happened, he asked only one question. "Do you regret surrendering the genuine ledgers?" "I regret not telling Uncle Chung sooner. As for the trail we lost, we can find another." He nodded. "That is what makes you different from Xiao Chenggu. Not that you will never make mistakes, but when you do, you are willing to remember that the lives of others are truly lives." Once the genuine accounts became public, the matter of the seized grain boats quickly reversed. Several imperial censors jointly submitted memorials to the throne, demanding to know why the second prince's household had interfered with regional grain transport and delayed disaster relief. The reputation for compassion and benevolence that Xiao Chengyu had cultivated for years fractured again. But he also became more cautious. The archer from the spring banquet supposedly committed suicide out of fear of punishment while being transported. The palace eunuch responsible for moving the guards disappeared. Half a page was torn from the Imperial Medical Bureau's record of the antidote. I had believed that remembering my previous life would allow me to avoid every mistake. Only now did I understand. Knowing the ending did not mean I could control every change along the way. We could only begin again with the traces that remained. Xia Linwan located a student of Mingda Academy who had once copied prescriptions at the Imperial Medical Bureau. The student remembered that 3 days before the spring banquet, noble consort Ja's palace had requested a rarely used antidote pill, supposedly as protection against venomous snakes and insects. My brother obtained the guard rotation list from an old acquaintance in the Imperial Army. The 8 guards assigned to Xiao Chenggu had all been ordered 30 feet away by the same palace eunuch moments before the arrow was fired. I asked Uncle Chung to inspect the palace purchasing accounts. We discovered that Suju, The wine-serving maid who had stood behind me received 500 taels of relocation silver on the night of the incident. Her family left the capital the next morning. The most important testimony came from Xia Linwan. He had not only seen Xiao Chongyu glance toward the flower wall before the arrow came. He had also seen the palace maid reach for my back just before I fell. But an eyewitness alone was still insufficient to prove who had arranged the entire attack. The final piece of evidence eventually came through Xin Wan. The day the second prince's household threw her out, she returned to the Marquis estate with her hair disordered and a red handprint across her face. She stormed into my study and slammed the false ledger onto the table. "You did this deliberately." "Yes," I said. "You framed me. You stole the ledger. You delivered the information." I looked at her. "But Uncle Chung was hurt because of my plan. That part was my fault." She froze, apparently not expecting me to admit it. "Do you think admitting fault makes you appear nobler than me? No. That is why I apologized to Uncle Chung and compensated everyone who was affected." I asked the question calmly. "What about you when you wagered the entire Marquis estate on Xiao Chenggu? Did you ask mother? Did you ask father? Did you ask anyone whose future might be destroyed by your choice?" Her lips trembled. She still wanted to claim that Xiao Chongyu was merely angry and would eventually forgive her. I asked only one thing. "When he called out in his illness, whose name did he say? Wan or Zaiwi?" All color vanished from her face. Madame Fong stood outside the door that night and heard the entire conversation. For the first time, she truly understood that the daughter she had cherished for more than a decade was willing to place even her mother and the Marquis estate on the gambling table for the position of imperial consort. 3 days later, Xin Wan came to see me willingly. She brought a handwritten note from one of noble consort Jaw's senior palace attendants. She also carried a waist token that could only be used by one of the consort's personal eunuchs. The instructions in the note were unmistakable. After the spring banquet, if Xin Zaiwi awakened, she was to be made to feel guilty. If she refused to attend the second prince, rumors were to be spread among the noble women that she was heartless and lacking in virtue. The waist token proved that the missing eunuch had entered the imperial armory before the banquet. "I am not giving these to you because I suddenly discovered my conscience," Xin Wan said quietly. "I know. Xiao Chong, you will not marry me."
No.
"If you marry into his household, I will be the first person they eliminate. So you are saving yourself." She bit her lip. "Sister, you make everything sound so ugly." "Yes." I put the evidence away. A person can only take responsibility for a choice after first admitting what she is truly doing. On the night before the second spring banquet, we divided all the evidence into 3 sets. One was delivered to the Empress. One was given to the Chief Justice of the Court of Judicial Review. Xia Linwan kept the final set. This time, I would not stake our success on whether Xiao Chongyu accidentally revealed the truth. Even if he said nothing at all, the evidence would be sufficient to drag the poisoned arrow scheme into the light. The second spring banquet took place exactly 3 months after the first. The peach blossoms had already fallen. Peonies now bloomed throughout the imperial garden. When I passed through the garden gates, I still experienced one moment of disorientation. It felt as though I might hear the snap of a bowstring at any instant, as though another poisoned arrow might tear through the flowers. Xia Linwan stood beneath the eastern corridor. He did not approach. He merely looked at me once across the crowd. I understood. The evidence had reached everyone who needed to receive it. Halfway through the banquet, the emperor finally mentioned the engagement. "The 3-month period has ended. Zaiwi, Xiao Chongyu, have you reached your decisions?" Xiao Chongyu stepped into the center of the garden first and knelt. "Father, my feelings have never changed." Zaiwi merely misunderstood me after the shock she suffered. "I am willing to forgive the past and still marry her with all the ceremony, due to my principal consort." Soft voices around us praised his devotion. I rose as well. Then I knelt beside him. "Your Majesty, my decision has never changed either." Joy appeared in Xiao Chongyu's eyes. I continued, "I will not marry him." The emperor looked at me. "Your reason?" I did not begin with the unpaid silver. Nor did I mention how the second prince's household had attacked the Xin family's businesses. Those matters proved that Xiao Changyu was no suitable husband. But they did not reveal the truth behind the poisoned arrow, because the assassination 3 months ago was not an assassination at all. Chando stepped forward with the first piece of evidence. It was the Imperial Guard rotation list from the day of the spring banquet. 1 moment before the arrow was fired, all 8 guards assigned to the second prince were ordered away by the palace eunuch. The second item was the duplicate register from the Imperial Medical Bureau, accompanied by the written testimony of the student who had once copied prescriptions there. 3 days before the banquet, noble consort Ja's palace collected a rare antidote known as the Azure Scale Pill. On the day of the banquet, the imperial physician examined neither the arrow nor the wound before producing that exact antidote. The third item consisted of palace purchasing records and a bank draft. Suju, the maid who stood behind me, received 500 taels of relocation silver on the night of the incident. Her family left the capital the following morning. The fourth item was the handwritten order and waste token surrendered by Xin Ruan. The order instructed her to force me to feel guilty after I awakened. And should I refuse to nurse the second prince, to spread rumors that I was heartless and lacking in virtue. The waste token proved that the eunuch had entered the imperial armory before the banquet. The Chief Justice of the Court of Judicial Review rose from his seat. Your Majesty, I have examined every seal and sample of handwriting. They are genuine. The missing eunuch has also been captured at a gambling house outside the city. 2 guards dragged forward a gray-faced eunuch. He fell to his knees without daring to raise his head. This servant received noble consort Ja's order to move the guards away and arrange for a palace made to stand behind Miss Shin. If Miss Shin did not step forward willingly, the maid was to push her into the arrow's path. The entire garden fell silent. Noble consort Ja surged to her feet. Lies. How can the words of one worthless servant be trusted? The Chief Justice presented another written confession. Wei Cheng revealed where the reward silver had been hidden. The money was found together with the private seal of the Ke family and wrapping marked with the insignia of the second prince's residence. Although the archer is dead, Wei Cheng's handprint remains in the armory's withdrawal register. Xiao Changyu finally spoke. Even if all of this is true, it proves only that Wei and the maid were involved. It does not prove that I gave the order. Xia Linwan stepped out from beneath the corridor. I can testify. He bowed to the emperor. Before the arrow was fired, the second prince looked toward the flower wall. He saw it coming. He did not move. When Miss Shan fell, I also saw the palace maid reach toward her back. Xiao Changyu laughed coldly. The Duke of Angua is close to Zaiwei. Why should his testimony be accepted? It does not need to be, I said. That is why I have one final question. I turned toward him. After the spring banquet, Your Highness told me in a southern alley that the arrow would not have killed me. If you had no part in the plan, how did you know where the arrow was meant to strike? How did you know the strength of the poison, and why were you certain I would survive? Xiao Changyu's fingers slowly curled into fists. He did not answer. The emperor looked down at Wei Cheng. Where was the arrow originally intended to strike? Wei Cheng pressed his forehead to the ground. The second prince's left shoulder. The archer was instructed to let it scrape the edge of the protective armor beneath his robe. When Miss Shan threw herself forward, it would enter her left shoulder instead. The imperial physician would administer the antidote immediately. If she did not move, the palace maid would push her. But Miss Shan suddenly fell to the right and struck the table. The second prince shifted with it. That was why the arrow entered the place between his shoulder and chest. This time, even noble consort Ja could no longer call it a coincidence. The emperor's voice was colder than ice. Xiao Changyu, what do you have to say? Xiao Changyu stared at me. The gentleness, dignity, and composure he had cultivated for years peeled away layer by layer. Father, I only intended for her to suffer a minor injury. The antidote was nearby. Nothing should have gone wrong. Once the Shun family saw that she had been injured for me, they would naturally support me more completely. I never intended to take her life. I looked at him. He had spoken the same way before my death in my previous life. Only a minor injury, only an error in aim, only the smallest price. But anyone who placed another person's life upon a gambling table had no right to use the word only. Noble consort Jaw suddenly pointed at me. If she had not retreated at the critical moment, how could you have been so badly injured? With that sentence, she tore away the last veil concealing the truth. The emperor struck Xiao Changyu across the face.
Bastard.
To force the Shin family to support you, you arranged a poisoned arrow at an imperial banquet and treated your betrothed's life as a bargaining chip. The blow turned Xiao Changyu's face aside. Yet he continued staring at me. Zaiwei, I knew you would save me. You loved me so much. For the first time, the words sounded almost absurd. So, Your Highness believed my love was something you could use whenever you wished. If I chose to shield you, that would have been an act of devotion. If I chose not to, that was my right. The hot tea you once brought me was real. The nights you stood beside me were real. But those moments of kindness cannot erase the fact that you used my life to set a trap. I bowed to the emperor. Your Majesty, I ask that the engagement be dissolved. The emperor closed his eyes. A long time passed before he spoke. Granted. One word severed the chains that had bound me across 2 lifetimes. The second prince is confined to his residence. His privileges as an imperial prince are revoked. The imperial clan court and the court of judicial review will continue investigating the case. Noble consort Jia is stripped of authority over the inner palace and ordered to reside in the palace of quiet reflection. Wei Cheng, the palace maid involved, and every person connected to the imperial armory will be punished according to the law. The guards moved forward.
Xiao Changyu was still looking at me.
Zaiwei, you will regret this. I rose. The greatest regret of my life was saving you. He would never understand. He no longer needed to. As I left the imperial garden, my legs suddenly weakened.
Sialinwan walked busy de me.
He did not reach for me immediately. He waited until I caught his sleeve of my own accord.
He stopped.
Did I not tell you to loosen your grip before pretending to faint? I looked at him. This time, I am not pretending. Linwan lowered his eyes. Then he turned his hand and enclosed mine within his palm. The eastern gate stood ahead of us. Just as he had promised, he had been waiting there all along. The imperial clan court and the court of judicial review continued their investigation for another month. Xiao Changyu was found guilty of arranging the poisoned arrow, unlawfully moving imperial guards, and interfering with disaster relief grain. His title was removed. He was sentenced to lifelong confinement at an imperial estate outside the capital. Noble consort Jia was reduced to commoner status and sent to the palace of quiet reflection. Several officials from the Ka family who had participated in the scheme were dismissed or transferred to distant posts. To preserve the dignity of the imperial family, the formal decree did not include every detail of the poisoned arrow plot. But too many people had attended the 2 spring banquets. No wall in this world was truly impenetrable. The virtuous reputation Xiao Changgu had spent years creating was ultimately destroyed by the arrow he had arranged with his own hands. After Xin Wan was brought back to the Marquis estate, she fell seriously ill. When she awakened, she still asked whether Xiao Changyu would send for her. No one answered. Father ordered my stepmother to move to an estate outside the city to recover in seclusion. Before leaving, Madame Fong came to see me. She seemed to have aged overnight. Zaiwei, she stood at the doorway. I know you will not forgive me. I only wish to ask one question. If I had treated you better, would Wan have avoided becoming what she is today? I was silent for a moment. Perhaps. Perhaps not. It was not wrong for mother to favor her. But you should not have taught her that crying was enough to take what belonged to someone else. And you should not have taught me that for the sake of peace in the family, I must always be the one to surrender. Madame Fong lowered her head. When she left, she did not ask me to care for Xinwan. 2 months later, Xinwan was sent to an estate in Jiangnan. Before departing, she came to see me one final time. Sister, you always knew His Highness would never marry me, did you not? Yes. Then why did you not tell me? I looked at her. I did. You never believed me. She bit her lip. You only wanted to see me end like this. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences. Her eyes turned red. Can you truly say you never forced me? Never. You volunteered to enter the palace and nurse him. You chose to steal the ledger. You chose to spread rumors for noble consort Jia. The only thing I did was stop preventing you. Tears fell from her eyes. Sister, I regret it. I did not answer. Before my death in my previous life, I had also regretted my choices. But no one had returned my father and brother because I was sorry. Some mistakes could be understood. That did not mean they had to be forgiven. I did not go to see Xin Ran off when she left the capital. I was at Mingda Women's School, distributing new books to the first group of students. Some were daughters of merchants, others were orphans from charitable institutions. The youngest was only 7. She held her book against her chest, her eyes shining as though they contained a sky full of stars. Xia Linwan stood in the courtyard, discussing the following season's lessons with several instructors. Sunlight rested on his shoulders. From time to time, he looked toward me. Whenever our eyes met, he calmly turned away as though it had been accidental. After the opening ceremony, we walked together through the corridor. Miss Shun has been very busy recently, he said. Your Grace has hardly been idle. Then how much longer do you intend to delay the marriage contract? I stopped. What marriage contract? Xia Linwan drew an envelope from his sleeve. He had not asked the emperor to decree the marriage. He had not asked my father to pressure me. There was only a marriage contract written in his own hand. The groom's name had already been entered. The place reserved for the bride remained blank. Is your Grace proposing marriage? Yes. With only one sheet of paper. The account books for the Duke of Angwa's household have already been delivered to your father. Mingda Academy is not my private property, so it cannot be included among the betrothal gifts. 2 residences in the Eastern District, 3 estates in Jiangnan, and the jewelry left by my mother are all listed. I could not help smiling. You have prepared everything thoroughly. One thing is still missing. What? Miss Shan's agreement.
He looked at me.
His eyes were as clear as they had been on the day we first met. There was no certainty that I would accept, no attempt to use kindness as a debt. He simply waited. And if I refuse, the contract will be withdrawn. Our cooperation with the women's school will continue as before. The Xin family's paper will still be purchased, and every payment will be settled in full. Your Grace would not be disappointed. I would, he answered honestly. But my disappointment would not give me the right to force you to marry me. The spring wind moved along the corridor. I suddenly remembered the imperial marriage decree from my previous life. Everyone had congratulated me. They said I had finally received everything I desired. But no one had asked whether I was truly happy. Now Xia Linwan placed the marriage contract in my hands. He had left the final stroke for me. I accepted the brush. In the blank space, I wrote my name, Shun Zaiwi. Xia Linwan looked at it for a long time. You do not need more time. I have already considered it for a long while. Since when I deliberately thought about it. Perhaps from the first time your Grace sent me preserved plum candy. Not from the spring banquet. At the spring banquet, I only thought your Grace was extremely irritating. And now, still slightly irritating. He reached out and took my hand. I will correct that gradually. Our wedding was scheduled for the following spring. There was no imperial procession. No attempt was made to impress the entire capital. Father formally returned half of my mother's dowry to me. I continued managing the other half myself. My brother became thoroughly drunk at the wedding feast. He gripped Xia Linwan's shoulder and warned him repeatedly that if he ever mistreated me, the Duke of Angwa would never again be permitted to purchase paper from the Xin family. Xia Linwan promised with complete seriousness. On the 3rd day after the wedding, we attended a spring banquet at the palace. The imperial garden looked exactly as I remembered. Peach blossoms were in full bloom. The fragrance of wine drifted through the air. Archery and pitch-pot games had been arranged for the guests. The moment a bowstring snapped, my entire body stiffened. For an instant, I saw the poisoned arrow again. Blood flashed before my eyes.
Xia Linwan stood beside me.
He did not cover my eyes. He did not tell me not to be afraid. Instead, he accepted a bow from an attendant and held it out to me. Would you like to try? My fingers trembled. What if I miss, then shoot again? I accepted the bow. My wrist shook badly when I released the first arrow. It brushed past the target and landed in the grass. The guests around us fell briefly silent. I heard someone draw in a breath. I heard the frantic beat of my own heart. Xia Linwan did not comfort me. He bent down, picked up another arrow, and offered it to me again. The second arrow struck the outermost circle of the target. It was not graceful. It was far from impressive, but it had reached the target. I slowly released a breath. I did not lower the bow again. When I drew the string for the third time, my fingers were still trembling. But this time, the bow was in my hands. The direction of the arrow was mine to choose. It cut through the spring wind and struck half an inch from the center. Cheers finally rose around us. Xia Linwan lowered his voice. When my wife pretended to faint, did she ever imagine she would marry the man who exposed her? I lowered the bow.
No.
And if you had known, I considered it. I probably still would have pretended. Why? Because I had to survive first. There could be anything afterward. He smiled. Sunlight passed through the peach blossoms and rested upon our joined hands. When the poisoned arrow came in my previous life, I had believed that loving someone meant being willing to die for him without hesitation. Even now, I still felt fear. The sound of a bowstring still awakened memories of the old wound. But healing had never meant forgetting pain in a single night. It meant knowing that my hands might tremble and still being willing to draw the bow again. The spring wind rose. Another bowstring sounded in the distance. I did not collapse, nor did I pretend that I was no longer afraid. I simply tightened my grip on the bow and steadied my feet. In this life, I would never again need to take an arrow for anyone. At last, I had learned to keep myself alive. End of the main story. Bonus story 1. After marriage, the Duke of Angwa learned how to owe money before we married. Xia Linwan and I signed many contracts. Every one of them was perfectly clear. How much paper would be delivered, the agreed price, the delivery date, the payment date. If payment was delayed, an additional 0.5% interest would be charged each month. Uncle Chung once praised him privately. The Duke of Angwa is the most reliable customer I have encountered in all my decades of business. I had always believed the same. Until the third month after our wedding, I was inspecting the accounts of the Duke of Angwa's household. Thick stacks of ledgers filled the study. I turned to the volume for Minga Academy and discovered that payment had still not been made for 2,000 bundles of bamboo paper purchased 3 months earlier. Believing I had misread the entry, I calculated it again. 3,600 taels. Not a single coin had been paid. Xia Linwan. He was reading beside the window. Hearing his name, he looked up. Yes, Minga Academy owes the Shin Paper Shop 3,600 taels. Does it? The account is written very clearly. Perhaps the steward forgot. I stared at him. Xia Linwan put down his book, looking perfectly composed. I will have someone ask about it tomorrow. There is no need. Why? Because I have already spoken to the Academy's steward. His fingers stopped against the page. I continued. The steward said Your Grace personally instructed him not to settle this account yet. He also said that since you and I are now married, there is no need for husband and wife to separate money so clearly.
Xia Linwan fell silent.
I looked at him. Those words sound rather familiar. Do they not? When the second prince's residents refused to pay me, they said exactly the same thing. He immediately stood. I will order the payment now. There is no hurry. There is. Xia Linwan took the ledger from me. This is indeed inappropriate. Suppressing a smile, I asked, Does Your Grace not believe that husband and wife are one, and should not divide matters so clearly? Husband and wife are one. The accounts must still be clear. Then why has the payment been delayed for 3 months? He paused. I wanted to see when my wife would inspect my accounts herself. At last I understood. So Your Grace deliberately withheld payment merely to make me investigate your household accounts. My wife has spent every day at the bookshop recently, leaving early and returning late. If I did not owe you something, you probably would not examine the Duke of Angwa's accounts carefully. He spoke with such confidence that I could not decide whether to be angry or amused. If you wanted me to manage the household accounts, you could have said so directly. I did. On the 7th day of last month. I thought carefully. On the 7th day of last month, he had indeed asked me one question. Does my wife have time to examine the household ledgers at the time I had been organizing the enrollment records for the women's school? Without looking up, I had replied, Your Grace may examine them yourself. That counts as telling me it does. I did not agree. That is why I used another method. I raised a hand to my forehead. Xia, you were not like this before. What was I like? You kept business and personal matters separate. You never owed anyone money. I still keep them separate. He pointed at the ledger. The debt belongs to my wife, not an outsider. That afternoon, the Academy sent the payment to the Shin paper shop. In addition to the 3,600 taels, there were 300 extra. Uncle Chung brought the banknotes to me. My lady, the ducal household has overpaid. I looked at the note Xia had sent. It read, 3 months overdue. Interest paid according to my wife's rules. I picked up a brush and wrote a reply. Interest between husband and wife is doubled. Half an hour later, the ducal household sent another 300 taels. A packet of preserved plum candy came with it. Uncle Chung stared in disbelief. His Grace truly paid. He did. Then should we allow the Academy to delay payments more often in the future? I was silent for a moment. Uncle Chung. This old servant was merely speaking carelessly. When I returned home that evening, Xia was waiting beside the dining table. I pushed the 600 taels of interest toward him. Take it back. Why, I am afraid that the next time you wish to see me, you'll place the entire Academy in debt. I will not.
Truly.
The Academy cannot be allowed to owe money. Then what will you owe next time? Xia considered the question very seriously. My wife. I froze. What? I owe my wife a meal. He stood and handed me my outer robe. So tonight, you must accompany me to eat wontons in the southern district. I looked at him. Then I finally burst out laughing. Before our marriage, Xia would not owe anyone a single coin. After marriage, he had somehow learned to keep debts. But every debt he owed me was eventually repaid with interest. Bonus story 2. The unspoken war between my brother and my husband. My brother had never particularly liked Xia. More accurately, he disliked every man who might take me away from the Marquis estate. When I was engaged to Xiao Chenggu, my brother privately cursed him 37 times. After I married Xia, my brother became far more restrained. He cursed him only 26 times on our first visit home after the wedding. Xia brought 6 full carriages of gifts. My brother stood outside the Marquis estate, watching coldly as the servants carried one chest after another inside. The Duke of Angua is certainly generous. It is only proper. Xia replied. What is in this chest? New tea from Jiangnan. And this one spices from the western regions. What about the 4 carriages behind those? Preserved plum candy for Zaiwi. My brother's expression darkened at once. Of the 6 carriages, for her, yes. Then why did you bring them to the Marquis estate? Zaiwi said the storerooms here were spacious. Standing nearby, I experienced for the first time the true meaning of bringing disaster upon oneself through careless words. My brother turned toward me. Is there no room in the ducal residence? There is. Then why place them here? I thought you also like sweets. My brother sneered. I do not. Half an hour later, I personally saw him order a servant to carry an entire chest of preserved plum candy into his courtyard. Father was in an excellent mood during lunch and drank 2 additional cups of wine. My brother, however, spent the entire meal watching Xia. When Xia took a piece of fish, my brother frowned. When Xia filled my soup bowl, my brother gave a cold laugh. When Xia peeled a shrimp for me, my brother finally put down his chopsticks. Duke of Angua. Please speak, elder brother. She has hands of her own. Xia glanced at the small cut on my finger. She injured one yesterday. That tiny cut counts as an injury, it does. My brother turned toward me. What happened to your hand? Before I could answer, Xia said, she cut it while slicing preserved plums. My brother became furious. Are there no servants in the ducal household? Why was she cutting them herself? She wanted to make the candy personally. You could not stop her. I tried and failed. Yes. My brother immediately developed a certain sympathy for him. When I was young, I had once insisted on climbing a tree to pick dates. My brother had tried to stop me. Not only had he failed, but father had punished both of us afterward. The atmosphere between them eased slightly. I had only just relaxed when my brother asked another question. Where's the candy she made at home? Why did you not bring it? There was only one small jar, and I could not bear to share it. My brother's face turned cold again. Duke of Angua. Yes. Come outside and compete with me. I nearly choked on my soup. Compete in what? My brother rose. Archery. Xia Linwan also put down his chopsticks. Very well. I caught his sleeve. Do not indulge him. My brother became even more displeased. Zaiwi, whom are you defending? I am defending the bows and arrows belonging to this household. If the two of you break them, we will have to spend money replacing them. Father burst into laughter from the head of the table. The competition proceeded anyway. My brother ordered 10 targets to be placed in the courtyard. The rules were simple. Each man would shoot 10 arrows. Whoever struck the center most often would win. My brother went first. All 10 arrows struck the center. He lowered his bow, looking extremely pleased. Duke of Angua, your turn. Xia Linwan accepted the bow. Instead of drawing immediately, he turned toward me. Whom does my wife wish to win? My brother interrupted at once. You are not permitted to ask her. I considered it carefully. A tie would be best.
Xia Linwan nodded.
His first 9 arrows struck the center perfectly. When he released the 10th, the arrow landed an inch away. My brother laughed loudly. You lost. Xia Linwan calmly lowered the bow. Yes. My brother clearly had not expected him to admit defeat so readily. You missed deliberately.
No.
Do you think I cannot see? Elder brother's skill is superior. My brother glared at him. After a long pause, he became even angrier. Who is your elder brother? Zaiwi's elder brother. She is the one who calls me that. I call people whatever my wife calls them. My brother opened his mouth. For once, he could think of no reply. On the journey home, I asked Xia Linwan, why did you deliberately miss the final shot? Today was our first visit to your family after the wedding. If I won, your father would be pleased. If I lost, your brother would be pleased. And what about you? Xia Linwan took my hand. My wife is returning home with me. That is enough to make me pleased. The following day, an invitation arrived from the Marquis estate. My brother challenged Xia Linwan to another match 3 days later. On the back, he had added one sentence. You are not permitted to lose deliberately. Xia Linwan read it and wrote a reply. Agreed. I reminded him. If he loses, he will be in a foul mood for at least 3 days. Then we will tie. He will not be happy with that either. What should I do? I considered the matter. Allow him to win by half an arrow. Xia Linwan looked at me. How does one win by half an arrow? That depends on the Duke of Angua's abilities. 3 days later, the 2 men competed for an entire afternoon. In the end, one arrow split another straight through the middle. Father declared it a tie. My brother insisted that his half of the divided arrow was closer to the center, and therefore, he had won by half an arrow. Xia Linwan agreed. That evening, my brother happily invited him to drink 2 jars of wine. The following morning, both men were found asleep in the Marquis estate study. When I arrived to take Xia Linwan home, my brother was gripping his shoulder and mumbling, If you dare mistreat her, I will. With his eyes still closed, Xia Linwan answered, Prevent me from purchasing Shun family paper. My brother nodded firmly. Exactly. I stood in the doorway. The 2 of them looked utterly ridiculous and strangely well-matched. Bonus story 3. The first fainting competition at the Duke of Angua's residence half a year after Xia Linwan and I married. More than a dozen children arrived from a charitable orphanage. They stayed temporarily in the eastern courtyard of the ducal residence while a new home was being repaired for them. At first, the children were terrified of Xia Linwan. All he had to do was appear at the courtyard gate, and the noisy children immediately fell silent. One day, a 6-year-old girl refused to take her medicine. Her nurse coaxed her for half an hour, but she kept her lips tightly closed. Xia Linwan entered and looked at her once. The girl immediately drank the entire bowl without stopping. That evening, she came to complain to me. "My lady, His Grace is frightening." I wiped the medicine from the corner of her mouth. "He only looks frightening. Can he smile?" "Yes." "I have never seen it." I considered the question seriously. "Pretend to faint tomorrow. He may smile then." The girl's eyes widened. Truly, at the time, I was only teasing her. The next morning, I was reading accounts in the study when chaos suddenly erupted outside. "My lady, something terrible has happened. All the children in the eastern courtyard have fainted." Terrified, I threw down the ledger and ran outside. When I rushed into the courtyard, more than a dozen children were lying neatly across the ground. Some had their eyes tightly closed. Others were peeking through narrow slits. The youngest was still eating candy. When she saw me enter, she quickly hid it behind her back. I stood at the gate in silence. Xia Linwan approached from behind me. What happened? Every child on the ground immediately became even more rigid. The nurse was sweating with panic. They were perfectly well a moment ago. Then they all suddenly collapsed. Xia Linwan surveyed the courtyard. All of them fainted, yes. He approached the first child. Her eyelashes were fluttering like 2 small fans. Xia Linwan crouched beside her. Unconscious people do not usually smile. The girl immediately pressed her lips together. He moved to the second child. Nor do they hide candy behind their backs. The child slowly extended her hand. The third child was clever. She lay completely still. Xia Linwan examined her for a moment. "There will be osmanthus cakes at lunch." The child sat up instantly. Seeing her rise, all the other children also scrambled to their feet. The courtyard erupted in cheers. Xia Linwan turned toward me. "My wife." "Yes, who taught them this? I have no idea." The girl who had complained the previous night immediately pointed at me. "Her ladyship said that if we pretended to faint, His Grace might smile." More than a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward Xia Linwan. "Smile for us. Your Grace, smile." Her ladyship did not lie, did she? The children surrounded Xia Linwan until he could not move. I leaned against the gate, struggling not to laugh. He looked at me. "Does my wife wish to see it?" I nodded. The next instant, he crossed the courtyard and lifted me into his arms. "Xia Lin." The children immediately clapped. Her ladyship fainted too. "Your Grace must smile now." I gripped his robe. "Put me down." A person pretending to faint cannot speak. I am not pretending. Nor should she be gripping my clothes so tightly. They were the same words he had spoken at the spring banquet. The children did not understand the reference. They only laughed more loudly. My face was still hot when he carried me back to the study. "How could you behave so improperly in front of the children? My wife taught them to faint." I was teasing them. I was merely cooperating. "Did you smile?" "I did." When the children betrayed you." I raised a hand to strike him. He caught my wrist and placed a packet of preserved plum candy in my palm. "My wife has won the first fainting competition held at the Duke of Angwa's residence. I did not even participate. You possess the most experience."
Xia Linwan.
"Yes, you will sleep in the study tonight." His expression finally changed. "My wife, pretending to look pitiful will not help." "I am not pretending." "Then you may truly sleep there." That night, he carried his bedding to the study. Half an hour later, more than a dozen children from the eastern courtyard lined up outside my door. "My lady, His Grace has fainted in the study." I opened the door. Xia Linwan stood behind the children, holding a pillow. I asked expressionlessly, "Did you teach them that?" All the children shook their heads together. Xia Linwan said, "They are naturally gifted." In the end, I allowed him to return to our room. The following day, a new rule was posted in the ducal residence. No one is permitted to pretend to faint without reason. Anyone who violates the rule will copy the 1,000-character classic 10 times. Less than an hour after the rule was posted, someone added a crooked line beneath it. The Duchess is exempt. I asked who had written it. Every child pointed at Xia Linwan. He neither admitted it nor denied it. Bonus story 4. Xiao Chongyu's most hated invitation. In the second year of my marriage to Xia Linwan, the women's school prepared to open another branch in the Western District. Before the opening, invitations needed to be sent to the noble women of the capital. After the invitations were written, I checked the guest list one name at a time. At the very end, I discovered an additional invitation. It was addressed to the second prince's residence. After the end of Xiao Chongyu's formal confinement, he had returned to his old residence. But few banquets in the capital invited him anymore. On the rare occasions when he appeared in public, he no longer traveled with the grand procession that had once followed him everywhere. Holding the invitation, I asked the steward, "Who added this?" The steward hesitated. "His Grace." I turned towards Xia Linwan. He was organizing the schedule for the school's opening ceremony, looking perfectly innocent. Why invite him? Courtesy. The women's school has no dealings with the second prince's residence. It once did, when he owed the Shin family money for paper and ink. I narrowed my eyes. "What are you planning?" Xia Linwan turned a page. "The women's school has added a new subject." "What subject?" "Accounting. And the students require a negative example." I could not stop myself from laughing. "Your Grace has become increasingly vindictive. I am only separating public and private matters." In the end, the invitation was sent. On the day the new school opened, Xiao Chongyu actually appeared. He wore a plain robe and was accompanied by only one servant. After 2 years, he had grown considerably thinner. When he saw Xia Linwan and me standing at the entrance, his steps paused. "Zaiwi." I bowed according to etiquette. "Your Highness." Xia Linwan stood beside me. "Your presence brings great honor to the women's school." Xiao Chongyu looked at him. "Did the Duke of Anguis send that invitation merely so I could observe the ceremony?" "Naturally." Xia Linwan's expression did not change. I strongly doubted him. After the ceremony, the female instructors demonstrated what the students had learned. The first lesson was accounting. The instructor wrote a problem on the wooden board. A man takes paper and ink for 3 years and accumulates a debt of 6,872 taels. If monthly interest is charged at 0.5%, how much additional silver must he repay after 3 years? Every guest in the hall immediately looked at Xiao Chongyu. The figure was far too familiar. His face darkened gradually. I turned towards Xia Linwan. He was holding a cup of tea, his expression so calm that one might believe the matter had nothing to do with him. A young student quickly calculated the answer. The instructor then asked another question. "If this man refuses to repay the debt because he is engaged to the owner of the shop, what should be done?" The children raised their hands eagerly. "Stop supplying him. Demand payment. Double the interest. Write his name on a board and hang it outside the shop." The final answer caused the entire hall to burst into laughter. Xiao Chongyu finally stood. "I am feeling unwell. I will take my leave." "Travel safely, Your Highness," Xia Linwan said. Xiao Chongyu walked 2 steps, then turned toward me. "Zaiwi, you now permit him to humiliate me in this manner." Before I could answer, Xia Linwan spoke. "Your Highness misunderstands. This is education. If Your Highness believes the example resembles your own conduct, it is merely a coincidence." He spoke the word coincidence with remarkable skill. I remembered using the same word to silence noble consort Jia at the flower banquet. Xiao Chongyu clearly remembered as well. His expression became even darker. "Xia Linwan, do not be too pleased with yourself." "I am not." "Is this how the Duke of Angua's household educates women?" "Yes." Xia Linwan's voice remained calm. "At the very least, they should know that when a fiancé's money is spent, the debt must still be collected." Xiao Chongyu swept out in anger. After he left, I nudged Xia Linwan with my elbow. "You truly did not arrange that problem." "No." "Then how did the instructor know such an exact number?" "The textbooks were prepared by Minga Academy." "And who approved them?" "I did." "Then you did arrange it." Xia Linwan placed down his teacup. "There is nothing wrong with the question itself. It was merely inspired by real life." I suppressed a laugh. Your Grace is taking private revenge while pretending to be perfectly reasonable. It is not revenge. Then what is it, a lesson? That evening after returning home, I discovered a new arithmetic problem on his desk. A certain duke deliberately arranges a lesson to mock another person and is sentenced by his wife to sleep in the study for 3 nights. If 1 packet of preserved plum candy reduces the punishment by half a night, how many packets must he send? The answer had already been written beneath it. 6 packets. 12 packets of preserved plum candy had been placed neatly beside the paper. I carried the problem to him. Why are there 12 packets? Xia Linwan answered. I am paying in advance for the next occasion. You are already planning another one. The textbook has a second volume. I gathered all 12 packets into my arms. Then not a single night will be forgiven. He looked at the now empty table. My wife, yes, you accepted the candy. The service should therefore be provided. I turned and smiled at him. The Duke of Angwa's household keeps its accounts clearly. These candies are interest. That night, Xia Linwan still slept in our room. At midnight, he appeared outside the door holding a pillow and announced with complete seriousness, if my wife makes me sleep in the study, tomorrow's textbook will contain another problem. I asked, what problem? He replied, if a certain wife accepts 12 packets of candy but refuses to fulfill her promise, does this count as defaulting on a debt? I stepped aside and let him enter. It was not because I feared being written into the textbook. The Duke of Angwa was simply correct. A person should not refuse to repay a debt.